I was staring at my bank statement when I realized my brother had been stealing from me for 8 months. Not borrowing. Not asking. Stealing. I'm 47, work as an insurance adjuster in Columbus, and I thought I was pretty good at spotting when people were lying to me. Turns out I was just good at spotting when strangers were lying to me. The number on my savings account was $247.83. Should have been around $23,000. I'd been so focused on keeping Danny afloat after Mom and Dad died that I hadn't been paying attention to my own finances. Just autopilot, work, pay bills, send money to Danny, repeat. I sat there in my kitchen surrounded by case files and cold coffee, feeling like the biggest fool in Ohio. Here's what really gets me. I was proud of myself for stepping up, for being the responsible older sister, for making sure Danny didn't end up homeless or worse after we lost our parents. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was taking care of family the way Mom and Dad would have wanted. But that morning, looking at those numbers, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not heartbreak. Something colder. Like the sound ice makes when it's about to give way under your feet. After the funeral, everything felt like I was moving underwater. Dad's heart attack came first, then Mom 3 weeks later. They said it was a stroke, but I knew better. She just couldn't live without him. Danny took it harder than I did, or at least he showed it more. He'd call me crying at 2 a.m., talking about how empty the house felt, how he couldn't sleep in his old room anymore. I started sending him money that first month. Just $500 to help with groceries and gas. He was between jobs again. Some story about his boss being unfair, which was Danny's usual excuse. I didn't question it. We were both grieving and I had steady work. Felt natural to help. Then it became $800 a month. Then $1,200. Danny always had a reason: car trouble, medical bills, the apartment deposit. He'd sound so grateful on the phone, telling me I was the only family he had left, that he didn't know what he'd do without me. Part of me liked hearing that. Part of me needed to feel needed. I was working longer hours then, taking on extra cases to cover the money I was sending him. My supervisor noticed I was staying late more often, but I told her I was just trying to stay busy. Grief makes people do strange things, she said. She was right about that. Looking back, I should have noticed that Danny never asked about me. Never asked how I was handling the loss, if I needed anything, if I was okay. But I was so focused on being the strong one, the one who had her life together, that I didn't realize I was drowning too. The first check I found was in my junk drawer, stuck between old takeout menus and dead batteries. It was from my checking account, made out to D. Morrison, Danny's full name, for $3,200. My signature was on it, but I'd never written it. I stared at that piece of paper for maybe 10 minutes, turning it over in my hands like it might explain itself. My first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Had I written this and forgotten? The months after the funeral were a blur of paperwork and sleepless nights. Maybe I'd sent him extra money for something and just blocked it out. But $3,200? That was more than I'd ever sent him at once. I called the bank. The teller, some kid who sounded like he was reading from a script, told me the check had been deposited 6 weeks ago. I asked if they had security footage, if there was any way to see who deposited it. He put me on hold for 15 minutes, then came back saying I'd need to file a formal complaint for that kind of investigation. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Danny's voice on our last phone call. How he'd sounded so casual when he mentioned his rent had gone up. How he'd laughed when I said money was getting tight for me too. "You're doing fine, Sarah," he'd said. "You always land on your feet." I went through my checkbook 3 times. Found 2 more checks missing from the back. The kind of thing you might not notice unless you were looking for it. The kind of thing someone might hope you'd never notice. When I finally called Danny the next morning, my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something else. Something that felt like the ground shifting under my feet. Danny's explanation was so smooth I almost believed it. He said I'd given him permission to write checks from my account months ago, during one of those late-night crying phone calls after the funeral. He said I'd told him to take whatever he needed, that I'd been so worried about him I'd insisted on it. His voice was steady, just the right amount of hurt that I'd forgotten. "Sarah, you were barely functioning then," he said. "You kept saying you wished you could do more for me. Don't you remember? You said you felt guilty for having the stable job while I was falling apart. And here's the thing, I did remember saying something like that. Not about the checks, but about feeling guilty. About wishing I could do more." Danny had always been good at finding the kernel of truth in his lies, building the rest of his story around it. I hung up feeling confused and somehow guilty for doubting him. But I also felt something else, a cold, practical part of my brain that deals with insurance fraud for a living. That part was asking questions. Like why Danny hadn't mentioned this arrangement before. Why he'd taken $3,200 all at once instead of smaller amounts. Why he'd waited until I was going through my checkbook to bring it up. I called my friend Lisa, the only person I trusted to give me a straight answer. Told her the whole story, expecting her to tell me I was overreacting. Instead, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Sarah, honey, you've been sending him money every month. Why would you also give him access to your account?" That question sat in my stomach like a stone. Because she was right. If I'd already been sending him money regularly, why would I give him blank checks on top of that? It didn't make sense. But I still wasn't ready to believe what my gut was telling me. I started keeping track. Not because I wanted to catch Danny in a lie, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was wrong. I made a spreadsheet, dates, amounts, bank transactions. I'm good with numbers. It's part of my job. But these numbers were painting a picture I didn't want to see. Over 8 months, Danny had taken $18,400 from my accounts, not including the monthly payments I'd been sending him willingly. Some of it was checks I'd never written. Some of it was electronic transfers that happened while I was at work from my savings account to his checking account. Transfers that required my online banking password. I remembered giving him that password once back in March, when he said he needed to check something about Mom's life insurance policy. I'd been handling all the estate stuff, but he'd claimed there was some detail about beneficiaries that he wanted to verify. I'd been on a conference call and just rattled off the password without thinking about it. The transfers had started 2 weeks later. I called the bank again, this time armed with dates and amounts. The customer service rep was more helpful, maybe because I sounded more official. She confirmed that the electronic transfers had been initiated from Danny's IP address. She also mentioned, almost casually, that someone had called 3 months ago asking about increasing the daily transfer limit on my account. That night, I sat in my living room with all the evidence spread out on my coffee table. Bank statements, printed emails, phone records. It looked like something from one of my insurance fraud cases. The kind of case where the evidence is so clear that even the perpetrator's lawyer advises them to take a plea deal. But this wasn't some stranger trying to scam an insurance company. This was my brother. The kid I taught to ride a bike. The one who'd slept in my bed during thunderstorms when we were little. The one who'd called me his hero at Dad's funeral. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in November. I'd driven to Mom and Dad's house to pick up some of their things I'd been storing in the garage. Danny had the keys since he'd been staying there on and off, said it was too hard to let the house go. I understood that. I'd been paying the utilities and property taxes while we figured out what to do with the place. When I walked into the garage, it was empty. Not just clean empty. The antique dining room set Mom had inherited from her mother. Dad's workshop tools. The Christmas decorations we'd been saving for our future kids. The photo albums I'd carefully packed and labeled. Gone. All of it. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, just staring at the concrete floor with its oil stains and the faint outlines where furniture had been. My phone was in my hand, and I was calling Danny before I even realized it. He answered on the third ring, sounding cheerful. "Hey Sarah. What's up?" I asked him about the garage, about our parents' things, about the dining room set that was supposed to be mine. Mom had specifically said so in her will. His tone changed, got defensive. He said he'd had to sell some things to pay for repairs on the house. Said he'd been meaning to talk to me about it, but hadn't found the right time. Said he'd kept the most important stuff, the things that really mattered. "Where?" I asked. "Where did you keep it?" Silence. Then, "Sarah, you're scaring me. You sound different." I was different. Something had shifted in that empty garage. Something had broken loose that I'd been holding in place for months. I wasn't his big sister anymore, trying to protect him from the world. I was a woman who'd been systematically robbed by someone she trusted. "I want a list," I said. "Everything you sold. When you sold it. How much you got for it. I want receipts." He started to cry. The same crying that had worked on me for 8 months. But this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like strategy. Danny showed up at my house 3 days later, unannounced. I saw him through the window, standing on my porch with his shoulders hunched, looking exactly like he had as a kid when he'd broken something and was waiting to get in trouble. Part of me, the part that had been taking care of him for 30 years, wanted to open the door and let him explain. I didn't. He knocked for 10 minutes. Then he started calling through the door, saying he was sorry, that he'd made mistakes, that he needed help. His voice got louder, more desperate. He said he was in trouble, that some of the money had gone to pay off debts he hadn't told me about. Gambling debts. He said he'd been ashamed to tell me, that he'd thought he could fix it himself. My neighbor, Mrs. Chun, came out to check on me. She'd heard the shouting. I told her I was fine, that it was just a family disagreement. She gave me a look that said she knew it was more than that, but she went back inside. After Danny left, I called my cousin Rachel in Pittsburgh. She'd grown up with us, knew our family dynamics. I told her everything, the money, the checks, the garage, all of it. I expected her to be shocked, to take my side without question. Instead, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Sarah, you know Danny's always been complicated. But cutting him off completely? He's your brother. He's the only family you have left." That phrase, "the only family you have left," felt like a slap, because it was the same thing I'd been telling myself for months. The same reason I'd been sending him money, ignoring the red flags, making excuses for him. Family. As if sharing DNA meant I had to let him destroy my life. I realized then that other people had probably seen this coming, that they'd watched me get taken advantage of and said nothing because it was family business. That they'd rather see me get robbed than deal with the awkwardness of calling Danny out. I went to the police on a Thursday, not because I wanted to destroy Danny, but because I wanted to stop him. There's a difference, though I'm not sure anyone else saw it that way. Detective Martinez was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of patient expression that comes from listening to people tell stories they don't want to tell. I brought my folder of evidence, bank records, forged checks, a list of stolen items with estimated values. The kind of documentation that makes a prosecutor's job easy. "This is your brother?" he asked, looking through the papers. "Yes. And you want to press charges?" I hesitated. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew that once I said yes, there would be no going back. No family dinners where we pretended everything was fine. No more phone calls where Danny cried and I made excuses for him. "Yes," I said. The detective explained the process. There would be an investigation, though with this much evidence it would be straightforward. Danny would be arrested, probably charged with identity theft, forgery, and grand theft. Given the amounts involved, he'd likely face felony charges. I called my bank from the police station parking lot and froze all my accounts. Changed every password, every security question. Set up new accounts at a different bank entirely. It felt like going into witness protection, except I was protecting myself from my own family. That night, Danny called me 17 times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that went from apologetic to angry to desperate. In the last one, he said he was going to lose his apartment, that he had nowhere to go. He said I was destroying his life over money that I didn't even need. Maybe he was right about that last part. I had steady income, health insurance, a paid-off house. I could have absorbed the loss and moved on. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the fact that he'd looked me in the eye for 8 months and lied to me. It was about the way he'd used my grief as a weapon against me. Danny was arrested on a Monday morning at his apartment. I know because Detective Martinez called to let me know they'd picked him up without incident. He said Danny had been cooperative, almost relieved. I didn't ask what that meant. What I didn't expect was the phone calls from other family members. Aunt Linda called first, then Uncle Bob, then my cousin Rachel again. Word had spread fast. Danny had apparently been telling everyone that I'd lost my mind with grief, that I was trying to destroy him over some misunderstanding about money. The story kept changing depending on who was telling it. In one version, I was mentally unstable and had forgotten giving him permission to use my accounts. In another, I was being vindictive because he'd gotten more attention from our parents growing up. In the version that hurt the most, I was jealous of his freedom and wanted to control him. None of them asked for my side of the story. They just called to tell me I was making a mistake, that family doesn't do this to family, that I'd regret it when it was too late. Aunt Linda cried on the phone, saying she'd never seen our family so broken. Uncle Bob was more direct. He called me cold and said I'd turned into someone he didn't recognize. I started screening my calls. Then I changed my number entirely. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for December. Danny's lawyer, a public defender who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, tried to get me to drop the charges. She said Danny was willing to make restitution, that he'd learn his lesson without going to jail. She said he was the sole caretaker for an elderly neighbor, and that his incarceration would hurt an innocent person. I almost laughed at that last part. Danny could barely take care of himself, let alone an elderly neighbor. But I didn't say that. I just told her I'd see her in court. The nights got harder. I'd lie awake thinking about Danny in jail, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Wondering if I'd become the kind of person who chose money over family. But then I'd remember the empty garage, the forged checks, the way he'd sounded so casual when he lied to me. The trial lasted 2 days. I testified on the second day, walking through the evidence piece by piece. The prosecutor was thorough, every forged check, every unauthorized transfer, every lie Danny had told me about why he needed money. I kept my voice steady, answered every question directly. Danny's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, someone who'd used her brother's grief against him. She brought up how I'd been the successful sibling, how I'd always had more money than Danny, how I'd lured him into depending on me financially. She made it sound like I'd set him up to fail. But the evidence was overwhelming. Danny had stolen nearly $20,000 from me. He'd sold thousands of dollars worth of family heirlooms without permission. He'd lied about it for months. The jury didn't need to like me to see that. When they read the verdict, guilty on all counts, I felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not sadness. Just emptiness. Danny didn't look at me when they led him away. His shoulders were shaking, but I couldn't tell if it was from crying or fear. The sentencing was 3 weeks later. 18 months in state prison, 5 years probation, full restitution. The judge said she was being lenient because it was his first conviction, and because he'd shown remorse. She recommended he get help for his gambling addiction while incarcerated. I was walking to my car when Danny's lawyer caught up with me. She said Danny wanted to apologize, that he'd written me a letter. I told her I didn't want it. She pressed the envelope into my hand anyway. I threw it away in the parking lot without opening it. I didn't want his apology. I didn't want his explanations or his promises to change. I wanted him to understand that some things can't be fixed with words, but I knew he never would. That night, I called my job and requested a transfer to our Cleveland office. I needed to be somewhere Danny couldn't find me when he got out. Somewhere the rest of my family couldn't corner me at the grocery store to tell me what a terrible person I'd become. It's been 6 months since I moved to Cleveland. I have a smaller apartment, a longer commute, and no one knows my story here. That's exactly what I wanted. Danny will be eligible for parole in 8 months. I know because the Victim Services Coordinator sends me updates whether I ask for them or not. She always includes information about victim impact statements and my right to be notified of his release. I filed the letters without reading them completely. I got a check for $3,400 last month, the first installment of restitution. It felt strange, depositing money that had been stolen from me back into my account. Like some kind of financial time travel that couldn't undo the damage. My family has stopped calling. I changed my number again after moving, and I didn't give it to anyone. Sometimes I wonder if they think I'm dead. Sometimes I wonder if that would be easier for everyone. I still do insurance fraud investigations. I'm still good at spotting when people are lying to me. But now I catch myself being harsher with the cases, less willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. My supervisor mentioned it during my last review, said I seemed less empathetic than before. I didn't tell her why. The house in Columbus sold 3 months ago. I hired a real estate agent and never went back. I don't know who bought it and I don't care. I just wanted it gone, along with every memory of trying to be the kind of person who puts family first. Last week, I saw a woman at the grocery store who looked like my mother from behind. Same gray hair, same way of standing. For a second, I almost called out to her. Then I remembered that my mother is dead. And even if she weren't, she'd probably be disappointed in me for what I did to Danny. That's the thing about cutting off family, you don't just lose the people who hurt you. You lose the version of yourself that believed family meant something. You lose the story you told yourself about who you were and what you stood for. I'm not the same person who used to send money to her little brother. I'm not the person who made excuses for him or believed his lies. I'm not even the person who thought justice would feel better than this. I'm just someone who lives alone in Cleveland and knows exactly how much her family's love was worth. Turns out it was about $20,000 give or take.